Good evening. How's everybody doing? Good to be learning with you on a Thursday, Yom HaMishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Yehudit in Great Neck. Paula in Chicago. Paula's in the house. The other Paula, wait a minute, skipped on me. Sharon in New Jersey. Melissa in Great Neck. Bella in Florida. Joseph in Massachusetts. Renee in Indiana. Shandora in Queens, not in the Bronx. Joe in the Inland Empire. David in Indiana. Ella's in the house. Aoife in Florida. Marjorie in Georgia. Welcome, everybody. It's Elul. Let's have a shofar blow. Shofar blast. This little beautiful shofar was given to me by the Biala Rebbe, who resides in Bnei Barak. Right, little ones are tough. Let's do this. Remember the shofar in Elul, the last month of the year. It's our wake-up call. Examine our deeds. What did we do right last year? Let's do more of that. Where did we fall short? What's our plan for doing better? That's what we're doing these days. Our daf today is page Yud Ches, page 18 here in Tractate Kiddushin, the 20th volume of the Talmud. Continuing our discussion of Mishna number 2 here in chapter 1, the various ways that a Hebrew slave or maidservant enters their servitude and leaves it. We don't practice this today, haven't in thousands of years, but our job is to understand these laws thoroughly and to ask ourselves, since the Torah is forever, how are these laws relevant to us today? Because if we don't come up with that answer, we haven't dug hard enough. Pick it up near the top of page 18a. Rav Chia bar Avin says that Rabbi Yochanan says, by Torah law, a Gentile inherits from his father, as it is written, Deuteronomy 2:5, because I have given Mount Seir to Esau, right? Jacob and Esau, that Esau, because I have given Mount Seir to Esau as an inheritance, meaning that Esau's descendants will inherit that piece of land after him. So the Gemara asks, but perhaps it is different with regard to an apostate Jew. Right, so we think of the patriarchs of the Jewish people, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob's twin brother Esau, not in that line of inheritance, right? The Yerusha, the inheritance of the Jewish people, right? The tradition that begins with Abraham, Esau is left out of it. In fact, there was enmity between Esau and Jacob, and Esau is understood to be the patriarch of Rome, right? That eventually Rome would be descended from the descendants of Esau. And actually our sages understand that as by extension, the Western world, right? So Esau did quite well for himself. The Jewish people, well, we have the Torah, right? Eventually we have Jerusalem, we have the Temple Mount, we had the temple for 1,000 years. And, you know, in the long run, if we consider not only this world, but the world to come, what a wonderful gift God has given the Jewish people. Our gratitude is endless. But in terms of what they receive in this world, Olam Hazeh, this world, wow, right? Esau's descendants, you know, Western society, Western civilization. Okay, but outside the Jewish people. Esau is outside the Jewish people. So now Gemara is asking, why do you say that Esau was not a Jew? Perhaps he was a Jew, since Isaac was his father, but he is considered an apostate Jew, right? A heretic, one who denies the tenets of Judaism. In other words, it is possible that Esau was not considered a Gentile, but rather Jewish, like the patriarchs. Consequently, he is categorized not as a Gentile, but rather as an apostate Jew. So we can't learn out from that fact that Esau and his descendants received an inheritance that by Torah law Gentiles inherit from their father. Rather, that is the law, but what is the proof? So rather, the proof is from here. Because I have given AR, to the children of Lot, right? Abraham's nephew, Lot, as an inheritance, Deuteronomy 2:9. And the descendants of Lot were certainly Gentiles. And the Gemara asks, and Rachia bar Avin, what is the reason that he did not state his opinion in accordance with the explanation of Rava, who derives the inheritance of Gentiles from a different verse? From the fact that if a Hebrew slave is sold to a Gentile, and it says he shall reckon with his purchaser, but not with his purchaser's heirs, right? Meaning that a Hebrew slave does not get inherit, who is sold to a Gentile under Torah law. Once his Gentile master dies, the Hebrew slave goes free. He is not inherited by the children of the Gentile. The Hebrew slave is not inherited, but any other property of the Gentile is inherited by his children. So Rava uses that as the proof that by Torah law, Gentiles inherit from their parents. We know that's the case. We're just looking for the source of that law. Now the Gemara asks, that's what he said. And the Gemara answers, is it written explicitly in the Torah, and he shall reckon with his purchaser and not with the heirs of his purchaser? We infer not with the heirs of his purchaser, so his purchaser is heirs, but it doesn't say that in the Torah. So if we're looking for a more clear source that Gentiles by Torah law inherit from their father, we would look to the verse about Lot and his descendants. And Esau really is a good verse, but just in case you could say that Esau is actually not a Gentile but an apostate Jew, that's why they look for a different verse. Now the Gemara further asks, and Rava, what is the reason that he did not state his opinion in accordance with the explanation of Rachia bar Avin? And the Gemara answers, well, perhaps due to the honor of Abraham, it is different. It is possible that for the sake of Abraham, an inheritance was given to the members of his family. Esau was Abraham's grandson after all, and the same may not apply to Gentiles in general, and that's why we go to the verse about Lot. Now, it's taken as a given here that Abraham was a Jew. It's obvious, isn't it? Abraham is the father of the Jewish people. But listen to this. The assumption of this passage is, this is Rav Steinsaltz's teaching. The assumption of this passage is that the patriarchs were considered Jewish. But this is far from clear, right? Because the patriarchs lived before the Torah was given. Right, the people who, now we say, well, the Jews were enslaved in Egypt. That was obviously the Jewish people. Were they not Jews because they were a people enslaved in Egypt and redeemed from slavery before the Torah was given? Well, the people who were redeemed from slavery, they were the ones at Mount Sinai who received the Torah. But what about the intervening generations between Abraham and the generation that was redeemed from slavery in Egypt? How can you say that they're not Jewish? But says Rav Steinsaltz, first of all, they did not observe all the laws of the Torah. For example, Jacob married two sisters, Rachel and Leah. That's prohibited by the Torah. So you can't say that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were Jews in the same way that the Jews were the Jews after the Torah was given. Second, the Gemara elsewhere discusses the relationship between the behavior of the patriarchs and the Noahide laws, right? The laws that adhere to all people. All humans are bound by the laws that were given to Noah after the flood. Right? So if elsewhere the Gemara compares, stories and acts of the patriarchs to the Noahide laws, well, this might indicate that they had the status of Noahides rather than Jews. So concerning the issue of observance of the mitzvahs, of the commandments, some commentaries argue that the patriarchs did observe the Torah fully, but only while they were living in the land of Israel. When Jacob married Rachel and Leah, he was not in the land of Israel. He had gone east to the place where the patriarchs had come from, right? Where Abraham had come from, where Lavan was living, the brother of Rebekah, right? And the father of Rachel and Leah. That's outside the land of Israel. So maybe the patriarchs sort of intuitively knew what the Torah held them to, and they observed those mitzvahs, but only when they were in the land of Israel. Other commentaries claim that the patriarchs are classified as Jews even if they did not follow the commandments in every respect. I mean, obviously, they were doing it instinctively before the Torah was given, and yet they did manage to follow most of the commandments. Now, the title of Jew is given to one who is obligated in commandments beyond those of the Noahide code. And since Abraham accepted the mitzvah of circumcision, he and his children are considered Jews with regard to inheritance, which is what we're discussing here, as well, right? So yes, of course, Abraham is considered a Jew, but that is how we derive it if we're actually going to examine the law a little bit more carefully. Okay. The sages taught there are details of the laws, the halachas, of a Hebrew male slave, a Hebrew slave, that do not apply to the case of a Hebrew maidservant. And there are details of the laws of the Hebrew maidservant that do not apply to a Hebrew slave. And the Baraisa elaborates, there are unique details in the laws of emancipating a Hebrew slave, as he leaves through serving a term of 6 years, and he leaves through the Jubilee year, and he leaves through the death of his master, which is not the case of a Hebrew maidservant. And there are unique details in the laws of emancipating a Hebrew maidservant, as a Hebrew maidservant leaves through signs indicating puberty, and she is not sold for a second time, and one can redeem her against his will, meaning the will of her master, as the Gemara will explain, which is not the case of a Hebrew slave, right? So the laws of the male Hebrew slave are different than the laws of the female Hebrew slave. Now the Gemara analyzes this Baraisa. The master said above, there are details of the laws of emancipating a Hebrew slave that do not apply to the case of a Hebrew maidservant. And the Gemara raises a contradiction from our Mishna. A Hebrew maidservant has one mode of emancipation more than the Hebrew slave, as she acquires herself through signs indicating that she has reached puberty. Now, the expression more than him indicates that all of the modes through which a Hebrew slave can be freed apply to the Hebrew maidservant as well. So we would say, well, maybe she has laws that don't apply to him, but all of his laws apply to her. Rav Shesha said this Baraisa is referring to a case where the owner designated her to marry him during the 6 years that she was serving. Consequently, she cannot be released from his authority by all of the modes through which a Hebrew slave can be freed, as she is his wife, right? Remember that a Hebrew maidservant would usually be sold, to her owner while she was still a minor, and then when she reaches puberty or completes her 6 years, she goes back to her father's house. While she's with her master, he can designate her for himself or for his son. Designate is prelude to marry, but it's not the same as marriage, right? As we shall see, when a master of a Hebrew maidservant designates her for marriage, right, to marry her, for his son to marry her, what he's essentially done is betrothed her, right? It's like betrothal. It's not like full-fledged marriage. But at any rate, this is obviously not available to the male Hebrew slave, and once she is designated, then she's in a different category altogether. She's no longer the maidservant. Now she is the betrothed. She is a wife in the sense that even a woman under betrothal, if you want to break off the betrothal, requires a document of divorce, a get. Where am I? Right. So the Gemara asks, if he designated her, it is obvious that she cannot be released in the manner of a male slave, as she is his wife and therefore requires a get. And the Gemara says it is necessary to state this explicitly, lest you say that the primary halacha, the primary law, is not nullified with regard to her, i.e., even after she has been designated, she can still be freed as a slave would be without a get. Therefore, the Baraisa teaches us that this is not the case. The Gemara asks, if so, that this is referring to a case where the owner designated her, why does she leave through signs indicating puberty? If he designated her, she becomes his wife, and signs indicating the onset of puberty should not affect her status. And the Gemara answers, this is what the Baraisa is saying. If he did not designate her, she leaves also through signs indicating puberty. If he designated her, she has to agree to that, of course, then she stays as his betrothed and eventually becomes his wife. Now the Baraisa teaches, and a Hebrew maidservant is not sold a second time. And the Gemara comments, from the fact that the Baraisa says this about a Hebrew maidservant, it can be inferred that a Hebrew slave, a male slave, can be sold a second time. But isn't it taught in a Baraisa that the verse, and he is sold for his theft, right? Remember that a Jewish slave, male, enters servitude as a Hebrew slave for one of two reasons. He's so poor that he can't get by in the world and he sells himself, or he stole and he doesn't have the money to make restitution, so the court sells him, in either case to serve for 6 years is the standard term. Now what the Bryce is saying is, yes, he can be sold as a Hebrew slave once, but not a second time. Is that true? But isn't it taught in the Baraisa that the verse, and he is sold for his theft, means that he can be sold for the items that he has stolen, but not to pay for his double payment? There's a penalty for stealing, that when you make restitution, you have to double what you stole. Now, although one can be sold into slavery to reimburse the owner for the principal of his theft, he cannot be sold to pay the fine. Furthermore, for his theft indicates, but not for his conspiring testimony. If he is a conspiring witness who is required to pay the value of what he testified that another had stolen, but he does not have the money to do so, he is not sold as a slave because he didn't steal. What's a conspiring witness? Right? When two witnesses come forward and say that the defendant committed a crime, and then it turns out that the witnesses are lying, then the punishment of the witnesses is what the punishment would have been for the defendant that they lied about. Not a bad punishment at all. I mean, and a pretty appropriate punishment, would you not say? However, if they were saying he stole, well, if he was found guilty of theft and couldn't make restitution, he would be sold into slavery for that. But conspiring witnesses are not sold into slavery for that. Interesting. Additionally, the phrase "for his theft" teaches that he can be sold for stealing only once. And once he has been sold one time, you may not sell him again. Well, can you sell him again or not? Sounds like the maidservant cannot be sold again, but the male slave can. Rava said, La Kasha, this is not difficult. Here in the second Baraisa, it is referring to one theft. He stole a large amount, but he's not worth enough as a slave for the proceeds of his sale to repay his entire debt. In that case, he cannot be sold a second time to complete the amount. There, in the first Baraisa, it is referring to two thefts, as he may be sold a second time if he stole once, was sold, and went free, and subsequently stole again. And Abaye said to Rava, the expression "for his theft" indicates even many thefts. Rather, Abaye, meaning that you can't sell him more than once, even if he stole many times. Rather, Abaye said, this is not difficult. Here in the second Baraisa, it is referring to one who stole from one person. Even if it was multiple thefts, but from one person, he can only be sold once to make restitution for what he stole. But there in the first Baraisa, it is referring to thefts from two people. If he stole from two different people, yes, he can be sold twice, right? One 6-year term to repay one person, another 6-year term to repay the other person, and that is the law. The sages taught, if the property he stole was worth 1,000, and as a slave he is worth only 500, he is sold and sold again. That would seem to contradict what we just read. If the property he stole was worth 500 and he is worth 1,000, he is not sold at all. Rabbi Eliezer says if the property he stole was exactly equal to his value, if he were sold, he is sold. And if not, he is not sold. Well, that sounds like it's pretty rare for a Hebrew, for a Jewish man to ever become a Hebrew slave. It's only when his worth matches what he stole. Rava said, in this case, Rabbi Eliezer triumphed over the rabbis, as what is different in a case where the property he stole is worth 500 and he is worth 1,000, that they concede that he is not sold. And the reason is that the merciful one states that he is sold in his entirety and not part of him. So too, if he is worth less than the value of the property he stole, one can say the merciful one states that he is sold for his theft and he is not sold for part of his theft. What is the law? If one whose value on the slave market is 500 stole items worth 1,000, he is sold, and he owes the remaining amount of the principal and the fine as a debt. So we're not going to be as restrictive as Rabbi Eliezer would say. The Baraisa further teaches, and one can redeem a Hebrew maidservant against his will, right? You can buy her out of slavery even against the will of her master. Rava thought to say that this means against the will of the master, i.e. she can be redeemed even if he refuses. Abaye said to him, what is the mechanism for emancipating her against the will of her master? Is it that one writes a document to him for her value, and when she has the money, she repays the debt? Why should it be possible to force the master to free her in this manner? He is holding a pearl in his hand, right, the maidservant who's working for him, and one gives him a shard of pottery instead, as this document is currently useless. Maybe the money will come together later and she'll repay the money that was paid to her father when her father sold her into this servitude, but the master's not getting that money now. Are we really going to allow this? Sounds like that would be a no. Rather, Abaye said she can be redeemed against the will of her father. It's not the master that we go against his will, it's against the father's will to redeem her. Why? Because of a family flaw, meaning we force the father to redeem her against his will, or maybe we raise the money somewhere else, but we redeem her against the will of the father. Why? Because the fact that this father has sold his daughter to be a maidservant in somebody else's household is a disgrace for her family that she came from. Of course. The harm caused to the family name by her status as a maidservant. So the court pressures the father as much as possible to redeem her, as it is disgraceful to a family if one of its daughters is a maidservant. See, now we're seeing, like, they've been talking about the technicalities of the law of how she enters, how she becomes a maidservant, how she leaves being a maidservant, the severance gift that's given to her when she leaves, the fact that the master can designate, etc. All these laws about how it's actually accomplished. But now we could take a step back and see a little bit, the kind of emotional context of this. Nobody approves of the fact that, a Jew can be sold as a slave to another Jew. It is not a good thing. In fact, it is a disgrace. It's a disgrace to her family, and since the Jewish people are one family, it's a disgrace to the whole Jewish people. Yes, it happened. Yes, it was the norm in the ancient world. Yes, we regulate it and give rights to the slaves and obligations to the masters that didn't exist before the Torah was given. But it's not like the Torah is saying slavery is good or even acceptable. It's disgraceful. And the Gemara asks, well, if so, one should force the family of a male Hebrew slave to redeem him also, due to the same family flaw, the disgrace that it brings to the family. Why do you only apply this way of thinking to the female slave? And the Gemara answers, there is a concern that he will go back and sell himself and earn money in this manner at his family's expense. A woman cannot sell herself into slavery. Only a Jewish man can do that. And so, because we're afraid that if he's broke, he sells himself into slavery, knowing that his family will redeem him, so then he'll sell himself again the next time he's hungry or broke or needs a fix, etc. So that's why we don't do that, right? We don't force his family, but we do force her family to redeem her. The Gemara asks here too, in the case of a Hebrew maidservant, we should be concerned that if the family can redeem her, perhaps the father, who doesn't care about his status, will sell her into slavery, then the family redeems her, and then he'll sell her again, right? Counting on the fact that the family will redeem her to avoid this disgrace. Aren't we concerned about that? And the Gemara answers that it is taught a maidservant is not sold a second time. We're not worried about that because he can't sell her a second time. Once she's been sold once and redeemed, that's it. No more maidservant for her. And whose opinion is this? It is that of Rabbi Shimon. As it is taught in a Baraisa, one can sell, i.e. transfer, his young daughter in marriage and go back and betroth her again if she was divorced or widowed. Likewise, he can sell her into slavery and transfer her again, this time for marriage after he sold her into slavery. But one cannot sell his daughter into slavery after marriage. And Rabbi Shimon says, just as a person cannot sell his daughter into slavery after she's been married, so too a person cannot sell his daughter into slavery after she's already been a slave once and ended that. Now the Gemara comments, and this issue is taught in the dispute between these Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishnah, as it is taught in a Baraisa with regard to the verse, he shall have no power to sell her to a foreign people, seeing that he has dealt deceitfully with her. Bevigdo va, he has dealt deceitfully with her. Now we're on 18b, and the verse indicates that once the master has spread his garment over her, meaning that he purchased her and then designated her to be his wife or his son's wife, her father may no longer sell her, right? Once she went from slavery to designation, meaning she went from slavery to being a betrothed woman who is free, but betrothed, then her father cannot sell her into slavery again. If the betrothal was broken off, she returns to her father's house. He might think, well, I'll get some money, sell her to a different family. This went well for me. He cannot do that. Not permitted. This is the statement of Rabbi Akiva, who interprets bevigdo as relating to beged, meaning garment, right? That the master spreads his garment over her. Bevigdo va, dealt deceitfully with her, meaning we're not going to allow more than one person to spread his garment over her. This means that since the father dealt deceitfully, bagad, with her and sold her once, he cannot sell her again. But again, we describe a father who sells his daughter as a maidservant to some other family as bringing disgrace on his family and acting deceitfully toward his daughter. Just so. The Gemara asks, with regard to what principle do they disagree? Rabbi Eliezer maintains that the tradition of the manner in which the verses in the Torah are written is authoritative, and one derives laws based on the spelling of the words. One relies on the way a word is written without the traditional vocalization, and therefore it is read as though it were vocalized as bevagdo, which refers to betrayal, not a garment. And Rabbi Akiva maintains that the vocalization of the Torah is authoritative. Remember that when a Torah is written, right, the way that Hebrew works, in case you're not familiar, all the Hebrew letters are consonants, right? They are consonants. Although, Aleph and Ayin have no sound, as it were. It's a placeholder for the vowel that comes underneath. And Vav, can be a vowel or can be a consonant. But basically, the language is written in consonants. And then when you see, printed Hebrew in a book, very often, like in a Chumash like this, right? You see the main letters and then the markings underneath the letters, the 3 dots or the little T or the 2 dots, 1 dot, etc. And that's the vowelization, right? That tells you how to connect one consonant to another with an E, O, U, etc. Right? The vowels come under. But in a Torah, a Sefer Torah, a Torah scroll, there are no vowels. That leads to a situation where you have words that are spelled the same, but depending on how they're vowelized, have different meanings. So what is the standard pronunciation of such words, right? And so what they're arguing about here is, there's kind of a primary pronunciation for any word, and then a secondary one. The secondary one would be, not the meaning in that context if we go just with the way the word is written out. But Rabbi Akiva is saying, well, we know that in the Torah, even though it's kind of a secondary way to vowelize it in a particular context, that's the meaning that we need. And so, the vowelization as those words are pronounced is the primary meaning when we're deriving laws. And Rabbi Eliezer is saying, well, when we're deriving laws, we go to the primary vowelization of such words. And Rabbi Shimon maintains that both the vocalization of the Torah and the tradition of the manner in which the verses in the Torah are written are authoritative. Consequently, she cannot be sold as a slave after she has been taken as a wife, nor can she be sold again after she has already been sold once. That's the upshot of this. Rabba Bar Ava raises a dilemma. Does designation, that the master designates his Hebrew maidservant to be, betrothed, essentially to himself or to his son, Does designation of a Hebrew maidservant for betrothal by her master affect marriage, or does it affect only betrothal? Right? When he designates her for himself, does she proceed to become his wife immediately, or does she become his betrothed? The practical difference of the outcome of this dilemma is whether he inherits her property, i.e., does her husband inherit her property if she dies before they actually, go to the chuppah, go to the wedding canopy? Does he inherit? Is she like his wife, or is she like his betrothed? Because a couple that is betrothed, to break it off, they need a get, a document of divorce. But if she dies while they're only betrothed and not fully married, he doesn't inherit her property. If he's a priest, he doesn't make himself ritually impure to attend her burial by entering the cemetery. And there's other laws like that, right? The status of a man and woman who are betrothed is different than the status of a man and woman who are husband and wife. So when a master of a maidservant designates her, does she become like his betrothed or like his wife, right? And they're saying these are the reasons why it would matter. And also, can he nullify her vows on his own without her father? A husband can do that, but one who's betrothed to her cannot. So what is the law? And the Gemara suggests, come in here, a solution to this dilemma. Bevigdova, dealt deceitfully with her, means once her master has spread his garment over her, the father may no longer sell her. The Gemara analyzes this statement. This indicates that her father cannot sell her afterward, but he can designate her for another man if the master dies or divorces her. And if you say that designation by the master affects marriage, once she is married, her father no longer has any authority over her. Rather, is it not correct to learn from this that designation affects only betrothal? Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said that this argument can be refuted. Here, the Baraisa is dealing with the ordinary betrothal of one's daughter, not to one who sells his daughter as a maidservant, and then she becomes designated. And this is what the Baraisa is saying. Since her father gave her, i.e. betrothed her to one who is obligated to provide her food, her clothing, and fulfill her conjugal rights, he can no longer sell her. Therefore, this Baraisa proves nothing with regard to the issue of whether or not designation affects marriage or only betrothal. So the Gemara cites another relevant source. Come in here. A father cannot sell his daughter as a maidservant to relatives with whom she is prohibited from engaging in sexual intercourse, as they cannot fulfill the mitzvah of designation. A master who has a maidservant does not have to designate her for himself or for his son. That's just an option that he has. What's being argued here is that, but he has that option. So since he has that option, you cannot sell a maidservant to a person whom she would be prohibited to marry because it's a relative, right? It's prohibited under Torah law to marry certain relatives. So since she can't marry them, you might think that the father can't sell her to such people as a maidservant. Since the option doesn't exist, it would be incorrect to sell her as a maidservant at all. The counter argument would be, designation is off the table, but why not allow the father to sell her as a maidservant to such a person? He can't marry her, he can't designate her, but he could work her as a maidservant. That's not prohibited. So they said in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, he can sell her to relatives because designation is merely an option, and its inapplicability does not negate the possibility of a sale. And they agree that he can sell her to a high priest if she is a widow, or to a common priest if she is a divorcee, or a yavama who performed chalitza, known as a chalutza. Although it is prohibited for her to marry these men, their betrothal is effective, and therefore designation is not entirely impossible in these cases. Interesting. We know that a high priest cannot marry a widow or a divorcee. But what if he betroths her? He can't marry her. It's prohibited by Torah law. Does that mean that if he betroths her, the betrothal never happened? No. The betrothal is a betrothal. He's not going to be permitted to marry her, but he has to give her a get to end the betrothal. The Gemara clarifies, what are the circumstances of this widow if we say that she betrothed herself when she was a minor and her husband died? Is she called a widow? Since the initial betrothal was entirely ineffective, as a minor cannot accept betrothal independently of her father, she would not be considered his wife. Rather, one must say that her father betrothed her, and she was subsequently widowed. But if that is the case, can he sell her? But it was taught that a person cannot sell his daughter into slavery after she's been married. And Rav Amram says that Rabbi Yitzchak says here it is referring to a woman widowed from betrothal of designation. And this is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, who says the original money of the sale of the maidservant was not given for the purpose of betrothal, but as payment for her work. And if the master wishes to designate her, he must give her additional money for that purpose, her and not her father. The relevance of this assertion will be clarified below. The Gemara explains the proof from this baraisa. And if you say that designation, that's what we're really asking. If you say that designation affects marriage, once she is married, her father no longer has authority over her. How can he sell her a second time after the death of her first husband? The Gemara asks from the other perspective. Rather, what will you say? That designation affects only betrothal? That seems to be where we're headed. If so, why does the Baraisa state, and they agree that he can sell her? After all, a person cannot sell his daughter into slavery after she's been married. So this Baraisa also refers to a case where a woman was betrothed, but the marriage was not consummated. Rather, what have you to say? Betrothal effected by her is different from betrothal effected by her father. Since the marriage was not performed through her father, but by the master giving her additional money, right? The father only sold her as a maidservant. The master designated her for himself as a wife. Was betrothal created or full marriage? We're still asking. Since the marriage was not performed through her father, but by the master giving her, the maidservant, additional money when he promoted her, upgraded her from maidservant to betrothed woman, meaning he freed her, but she now passes from being his maidservant to being betrothed to him. Right. Since the marriage was not performed through her father, but by the master giving her additional money, as held by Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, the principle that one cannot sell his daughter into slavery after betrothal does not apply. It's not that the father sold her. The father only sold her as a maidservant. She became betrothed on her own, in a sense, when she was designated by her master. But by the same reasoning, even if you say that designation does create marriage, not just betrothal, you can argue that marriage effected by her is different from marriage effected by her father. So the challenge is rejected. What is this comparison? Granted, one form of betrothal is different from the other betrothal, meaning there's a difference between standard betrothal with the father's consent and betrothal through designation, which is performed upon the master's initiative without the father's consent. Doesn't need the father's consent. After that type of betrothal, the father can, in fact, sell her a second time. But with regard to one mode of affecting marriage in relation to another mode of affecting marriage, is the matter different? In both cases, she is fully released from her father's authority by Torah law, and therefore he should not be able to sell her again afterward. I'm very close to done. Questions or comments, get them in. The Gemara asks, and according to the explanation, because I'm on page 19a, according to the explanation of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, who says that even according to Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, the original money of the sale of the maidservant was given for the purpose of betrothal. In accordance with whose opinion does he establish the baraisa that permits a father to sell his widowed daughter? After giving her in marriage, a father may no longer sell his daughter into slavery. And the Gemara explains, he establishes in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who says it is for slavery after slavery that he is not able to sell her. But he is able to sell her into slavery after marriage. Where did this come out? Designation affects betrothal. Designation is similar to betrothal, and it is not similar to marriage. Consequently, if the master is a priest, he does not inherit her property and does not become impure to bury her if she passes away, and he cannot nullify her vows until she enters the wedding canopy. And as for selling her after she's been sold once before, if one sells his daughter as a maidservant and she is designated for marriage, but her master dies or divorces her and she returns to her father's authority while still a minor, he can sell her a second time as a maidservant. If he betroths his daughter to a man while she is a minor and she is subsequently widowed or divorced, he can no longer sell her as a maidservant. Okay, let's check some comments and questions. On Kiddushin 18. load. Sharon comments, but I thought Lot and his family were saved in Sodom in deference to Abraham. If it's in deference to Abraham, Sharon is saying, why is he not regarded as the family of Abraham? I mean, he's certainly regarded as the family of Abraham. We know he's his nephew, but not as a Jew, because he's not in that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, you could say, well, if we're going to say that, Esau was given an inheritance, even though he's an apostate Jew, in deference to Abraham, and that's why we don't consider him necessarily a Gentile, you might say the same about Lot, right? That he's saved out of deference to Abraham, but he's really an apostate Jew rather than a Gentile. I think it's a good argument, but apparently the sages disagree, and they say, we do know that Esau is a Gentile. Certainly his descendants are, and the same with Lot, and we don't think of, certainly not Lot, as an apostate Jew. And I don't think we think of Esau as an apostate Jew either. They're both considered Gentiles. Joseph, just to double check, was it the final analysis that Esau was a Jew by virtue of lineage, yet he was an apostate? No, I think it could be argued that is where they came out, but he's not considered that. That's my understanding of what we just read. And Sharon comments, how could he be a Jew, even loosely understood, without assuming the covenant through circumcision, right? And that is the main thing. Lot did not take on the covenant of circumcision that we know of, and certainly his descendants did not, and for sure Esau's descendants did not. And that's really that bright line test, right? Okay, that's what we've got for today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Friday, the regular Friday.